Welcome to episode 2 of The Evidence Room. Inside every investigation, the truth is hidden in the evidence. Tonight, we explore one of Japan's most chilling unsolved crimes.
Imagine walking into a crime scene and just finding the killer's entire outfit, folded neatly. Like you find his blood, his weapon, his fingerprints right there on the computer mouse.
Wow.
And a half-eaten melon that he just casually snacked on after committing a quadruple homicide. Now imagine that despite having this literal mountain of perfect physical evidence, that killer just steps out the front door and, well, completely vanishes for a quarter of a century.
Right. And, to you listening, that is the exact paradox we are diving into today. The mission for our deep dive is to explore the December 2000 Setagaya family murders.
Yeah, it's a wild one.
It is. It's a case that completely defies logic. I mean, it's this locked box mystery where investigators collected over 12,500 pieces of evidence. They literally have the suspect's DNA, his exact shoe size, and like you said, what he ate for dinner. Yet he is a total ghost.
Okay, let's unpack this by looking at the victims and the incredibly strange, almost eerie setting where this all took place, because to understand how someone could linger in a house for hours after a murder, you really have to understand why nobody noticed them doing it.
Absolutely. The environment is it's absolutely crucial here. You really cannot separate this crime from its geography. So we're looking at the Miyazawa family, and they lived in the Kamisoshigaya neighborhood, which is in Tokyo's Setagaya ward.
Right, okay.
And the father, Mikio, he was 44. He was your typical salaryman, corporate professional working really long hours, basically providing a very standard, comfortable middle-class life for his family.
Yeah, totally typical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
His wife, Yasuko, she was 41, and they had an 8-year-old daughter named Nina and a 6-year-old son named Ray.
So from the outside, it's this picture-perfect life, but their specific address was physically very, very vulnerable.
Because their home was bordered by a baseball ground, a small river, and Soshigaya Park. And that park, right, is really the key to the isolation here.
Yeah, it really is. Because in the months leading up to the murders, the Tokyo metropolitan government was aggressively planning to expand Soshigaya Park. And because of this expansion project, the surrounding residential area had actually been designated as an eviction zone.
So basically, out of what used to be this bustling residential block filled with families, most of the neighbors had already sold their land and moved away.
Right, they were gone.
By December of 2000, the Miyazawa's house was one of only 4 remaining homes. Which, to put the scale of that into perspective for you, imagine living in a modern-day ghost town. But that ghost town is situated right in the middle of one of the most densely populated cities on Earth.
Exactly. Tokyo is just humming all around them, but their specific street is completely hollowed out. It's empty. And it creates this, the ultimate blind spot. There's almost no foot traffic at all. There are no neighbors looking out their kitchen windows, no one next door to hear a struggle.
Right.
It basically sets a stage where a really prolonged intrusion isn't just possible, it's practically invited by all that urban decay around them.
It's so creepy. And knowing how isolated they were really makes the timeline of their final evening, which was December 30th, 2000, feel intensely ominous. The sources lay out a timeline of just total normalcy.
Yep, perfectly normal night.
The family had dinner together. They had shirataki noodles, rice, and chicken. Afterward, 8-year-old Nina walks to her grandmother Haruko's house. And Haruko actually lives in one of those remaining 4 houses, literally right next door.
Right, just steps away.
Right. So Nina goes there to watch TV, and she heads home around 9:30 p.m. The final digital footprint we have of the family is Mikio logging into a password-protected work email, and that was at exactly 10:38 p.m.
It's just the mundane reality of a household settling down, The children are in bed, the parents are winding down for the night. The house is completely quiet. And sometime shortly after that 10:38 p.m. email, the killer exploits that geographic isolation we talked about to make his move.
So let's examine how he actually breached the home, because the tactical movement through the house reveals so much about who this person might be. Like, he doesn't just kick in the front door.
No, not at all. The breach actually happens on the 2nd floor. Forensic teams determine the killer climbed up, likely using the exterior fence or maybe an air conditioning unit, to reach this 2nd floor bathroom window.
A bathroom window?
Yeah. He cut through the screen, physically broke the mosquito guard, and literally squeezed his way inside, leaving these muddy footprints on the exterior wall.
I mean, squeezing through a tiny bathroom window on the 2nd story seems unnecessarily risky when you could just break a ground floor pane. Right?
Well, it is risky from a physical standpoint, for sure. It requires, significant agility and balance. But tactically, it is brilliant.
Oh, really? How so?
Because bypassing the ground floor means you bypass the main living areas where a parent might be staying up late reading or like watching television. A second floor entry puts the intruder directly into the most intimate, vulnerable area of the home, which is the bedrooms.
Wow, okay. That makes terrifying sense. And the very first room he encounters actually belongs to the 6-year-old boy, Ray. The child is fast asleep, and what happens next is just deeply disturbing, not just for its brutality, but for the actual method.
Yeah.
Ray is the first victim, and he is the only victim in the entire house who is killed without a weapon. The killer strangles him with his bare hands.
From a behavioral analysis perspective, this is a highly calculated sequence. If you bring a knife to a home invasion, your instinct is usually to use it.
Right, of course.
But choosing to strangle a sleeping child instead is all about maintaining absolute tactical silence. A knife wound can cause a victim to scream or thrash around. Strangulation, when done efficiently, prevents any noise that would alert the adults downstairs.
That's so chilling.
It is. It immediately forces investigators to ask, does this individual have prior combat training? Or maybe some specialized experience in home invasions?
But the terrifying part is that the silence doesn't even hold. Investigators believe Mikio, who was working late on the ground floor, actually heard a noise and rushed up the stairs to confront the intruder.
Right.
And this is where the physical violence really erupts. And, you mentioned earlier the killer brought a weapon. It wasn't just like a standard pocket knife.
No, it was a very specific blade. It was a Seki Magoroku Ginju sashimi knife.
Right. And for those listening who might not know culinary tools, why does that specific type of knife matter so much here?
So a sashimi knife is designed for one very specific purpose, which is slicing raw fish with extreme precision.
Okay.
It is incredibly sharp, but the blade itself is thin, it's brittle, and it is definitely not designed to strike hard surfaces like human bone. So during this frantic struggle on the staircase, the killer attacks Mikio with such extreme, uncontrolled force that the brittle tip of the sashimi knife actually snaps off. Yeah. It snaps off and remains embedded inside Mikio's skull. And Mikio is ultimately pushed or, falls down the stairs, covered in defensive wounds, fighting to protect his family.
So because the blade shattered in Mikio's skull, the killer is now suddenly weaponless, right? When he realizes there are 2 more people in the house. Yasuko and 8-year-old Nina are sleeping up in the attic, which is accessed by this pull-down ladder.
Exactly. So the killer heads up to the attic and initially attacks the mother and daughter with the broken sashimi knife. But, as you can imagine, a shattered culinary blade is pretty ineffective.
Right.
So he leaves them bleeding in the attic, climbs back down the ladder, walks all the way down to the family's first-floor kitchen, rummages through their drawers to find a sturdy santoku, which is a general-purpose chef's knife, and then walks all the way back up to the attic to finish the murders.
That is just, it's horrifying. And there is a detail from the crime scene photos during that pause in the violence that is just devastating.
Yeah, the tissue.
Right. Investigators found a blood-soaked tissue lying right next to Yasuko and Nina. It tells us that while the killer was downstairs hunting for a second weapon, Yasuko used those terrifying minutes to try and staunch her daughter's bleeding.
It's heartbreaking. It really strips away all that clinical forensic data and grounds you in the horrifying human reality of a mother trying to save her child in her final moments.
Yeah.
And, the psychological composure it takes for the killer to stop an attack, navigate an unfamiliar house to upgrade his weapon, and then return to finish the job. It shows a chilling, almost mechanical level of determination.
It really does. So fast forward to the next morning, December 31st. Grandma Haruko, who lives next door, tries to call the house to coordinate the day. She gets no connection, the lines have been cut, or maybe the phone is off the hook.
Right.
So she walks next door, uses her spare key to unlock the front door, and she discovers Mikio at the bottom of the stairs.
And that tragic discovery triggers what would eventually become the largest mobilization of police resources in Japanese history. Because the officers who arrived, they didn't just find a murder scene. They found a space where the killer had practically moved in.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The violence of the attack is horrifying, but it is the killer's behavior after the violence that makes this case so psychologically baffling to me. I mean, he didn't run.
No.
He stayed in the house, surrounded by 4 bodies, for anywhere from 2 to 10 hours.
What's fascinating here is the absolute behavioral disconnect from standard criminal psychology.
Yeah.
Usually the post-defense behavior is immediate flight, right?
Yeah, you get out of there.
Exactly. The adrenaline crashes, panic sets in, the reality of the crime hits, and the perpetrator desperately wants distance. But this individual decides to make himself at home.
So let's break down exactly what he did during those hours. First, medical triage. During the intense fight with Mikio, the killer severely sliced his own hands, and he casually locates the family's first aid kit, bandages his wounds, and takes Yasuko's sanitary pads to staunch his own bleeding.
Using sanitary pads is a remarkably improvised, cold-blooded choice. They're highly absorbent, and they're actually often used in field medicine for severe trauma when heavy bandages aren't available.
Really?
Yeah. It shows he is thinking logically, he's not panicking.
And after treating his wounds, he gets hungry. He goes to the family's refrigerator. He takes out 4 cups of ice cream and eats them. He pulls out a melon and eats it with his bare hands, leaving teeth marks. He even drinks 4 bottles of barley tea.
And this is crazy because eating is a parasympathetic nervous system response. You literally cannot comfortably digest food if your body is in a state of high adrenaline fight or flight.
Right.
So to sit down and eat melon and ice cream in a house where you have just slaughtered an entire family requires an extreme form of psychological dissociation. His heart rate had stabilized. He felt entirely secure.
The bizarre comfort level doesn't even stop at the food. He uses the upstairs toilet and doesn't bother to flush it. He wanders into a storage room, takes Mikio's wallet, Yasuko's purse, and various family documents, and unceremoniously dumps them all into the bathtub.
Yeah.
But he hardly steals anything. He takes a tiny bit of cash, but leaves stacks of bills sitting right out in the open. And then, at 1:20 in the morning, he sits down at the family computer. He logs onto the internet and browses a theater website that Mikio had bookmarked.
Browsing a victim's bookmark websites while they literally lie dead in the next room is incredibly erratic. Dumping the documents into the bathtub suggests, a chaotic search for something specific or maybe a deliberate act of disrespect.
Yeah, maybe.
But surfing the web, that indicates boredom. It implies a need to pass the time while waiting for something or maybe waiting for the sun to come up before making an escape.
Well, because he lingered for hours, touching everything, eating and treating his wounds, he left behind just an ocean of forensic evidence. The scale of the investigation is staggering. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police have deployed over 280,000 personnel to this case over the years.
That's a massive number.
It is. They have sifted through 5 million fingerprints and cataloged over 12,500 pieces of physical evidence from that house alone.
And the physical evidence actually tells 2 completely contradictory stories, which is wild. If you look at the items he left behind, the profile splits. On one hand, you have the aesthetic of like a local Tokyo teenager, and on the other, you have the footprint of an international traveler. But let's look at his clothing.
Right, because his own clothes were soaked in blood, he left almost his entire outfit folded at the scene, opting to steal some of Mikio's clothes for his escape. He left behind a pair of Slazenger athletic shoes, size 27.5 centimeters. But investigators found a crucial manufacturing detail. That specific size, 27.5, was manufactured and sold exclusively in South Korea.
It is a massive red flag. It immediately introduces an international angle. Either the killer traveled to Korea to buy them, or they were imported somehow.
Then there's his shirt, a light gray and purple raglan sweatshirt. Investigators dug into the retail records and found that only 130 of these specific sweatshirts were ever sold in all of Japan, and only 10 were sold in Tokyo.
Meaning the suspect pool for that specific shirt in that city is limited to exactly 10 people.
10 people. He also left behind a black handkerchief that smelled strongly of Drakkar Noir cologne. And the handkerchief had a very specific modification, a 3-centimeter slit cut right into the center of the fabric.
And that modification tells a really violent story. Wrapping a knife handle with fabric prevents your hand from slipping down the blade when it becomes covered in blood. Slipping the handle through a pre-cut slit secures the fabric in place.
Right.
It is a highly specialized knife-fighting technique that authorities noted is sometimes seen in certain martial arts practices in the Philippines.
Yeah.
So again, we have another fragment of international influence.
But I think the most baffling item is his hip bag, basically a standard fanny pack. Inside, forensics teams found microscopic grains of sand. Now, sand acts like a geological fingerprint. Its mineral composition is entirely unique to where it formed.
Right, it's very specific.
Exactly. When they analyzed this sand, it came from 2 distinct locations. One was a skate park locally in Japan. The other location, the Mojave Desert, specifically a highly restricted area right near Edwards Air Force Base in California.
I mean, to find trace minerals from a restricted American military base inside a bag left at a murder scene in Tokyo is the kind of detail you expect in an espionage thriller, not a suburban home invasion.
Definitely. And the biological evidence is even more intimate. Because he didn't flush the toilet, police analyzed his feces. They determined his last meal prior to the murders included string beans and sesame seeds. He left his type A blood all over the house from his sliced hands, and his fingerprints were lifted from the ice cream cups, the computer mouse, the drawers.
And the biological data eventually gave investigators a genetic heritage. DNA profiling revealed the killer was a male of mixed ancestry.
Right.
His maternal DNA pointed to European or Caucasus descent somewhere around the Mediterranean or Adriatic Sea, and his paternal DNA pointed to East Asian ancestry.
Okay, so I have to stop here and challenge the very premise of this mystery. If police have his exact DNA profile, his clear fingerprints, his shoe size, his blood type, his exact diet, and the literal sand from his bag, how is he a ghost? I mean, it's like having the exact key to a lock, but you're standing in a city of 10 million doors and you don't know which one it fits. How do you not catch him?
You've perfectly described the ultimate frustration of modern forensics. Evidence only works if you have a baseline to compare it against. You can have a pristine, high-definition fingerprint, but if that person has never been arrested and put into a criminal database, that print is utterly useless.
That is so frustrating.
It is. You can have a complete DNA sequence, but familial DNA tracing wasn't widely available in Japan at the time. The evidence tells us exactly what he is biologically, but without a database match, it cannot tell us his name.
And without a name, investigators had to rely on theories to try and make sense of these scattered, completely contradictory clues. Like, how do you reconcile a local skater with an international operative?
Exactly.
So the first major theory was what we can call the skater kid.
And this theory leaned heavily on the clothing and the local sand. The baggy raglan sweatshirt, the Slazenger shoes, the hip bag, it perfectly matched the youth skater aesthetic of the year 2000.
And it gave them a potential motive. Because a few days before the murders, Mikio Miyazawa had actually confronted some local skaters at the nearby park, complaining about the noise they were making.
Right. It suggests a petty, localized grudge that somehow escalated into unimaginable violence. The estimated age of the suspect, which was based on the agility required to scale the house and the erratic diet of ice cream and melon, was pegged somewhere between 15 and 22 years old.
But when police systematically interviewed the local skaters, ran their fingerprints, and checked their alibis, they cleared every single one of them. The theory just hit a brick wall. So they shifted focus to the international anomalies with Theory 2, the military or foreigner angle.
And this theory focuses on the sand from Edwards Air Force Base, the Korean exclusive shoes, the mixed Eurasian DNA, and that Philippine knife wrapping technique. Investigators even noted that the blood drops left on the floor indicated a military-like, gait-like, a specific, measured way of marching or stepping.
I have to push back on the military theory, though, because the physical profile built by forensics completely contradicts the idea of an adult soldier.
Oh, for sure.
The police estimate the killer was roughly 170 centimeters tall, so about 5'7" and incredibly thin and lithe. I mean, he had to be, to squeeze himself through that tiny bathroom window that does not fit the profile of a bulky, trained military adult.
It is a massive paradox.
Yeah.
The forensic trace evidence points to international military travel, but the physical constraints of the crime scene point to an agile, slender youth.
Which led to a third, slightly more cinematic theory, the contract killer. A journalist actually published an investigation suggesting the killer was a foreign, ex-military hitman who was hired by shadowy real estate developers because Mikio refused to sell his land for the park expansion.
I mean, it sounds plausible given the eviction zone context, but police investigated this thoroughly and found absolute zero evidence.
Nothing.
Nothing. Furthermore, the behavioral evidence destroys this theory. A professional hitman executes a target and leaves immediately. A professional does not slice his own hands open with a brittle sushi knife, bandage himself with sanitary pads, and sit on the couch eating ice cream for 3 hours.
Good point. So if he wasn't a hitman and he wasn't a local skater, how did he vanish?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the answer likely lies in a temporal loophole in Japanese immigration law. The prevailing theory among experts today is that the killer was a foreign national, or living abroad, and he fled the country shortly after the murders.
But how does fleeing the country make his DNA and fingerprints disappear forever?
Well, prior to the year 2001, Japan did not universally fingerprint non-citizens entering or exiting the country. It was only after 2001 that Japan instituted a strict policy of biometric fingerprinting at the borders.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the killer committed the crime on December 30th, 2000. He slipped through a closing window in history. He left before the biometric nets were cast, meaning his fingerprints are completely absent from international travel databases.
He literally beat the clock on modern border security, and the failure to catch him has left a massive open wound in Japanese society. The legacy of the Setagaya family murders is profound. In fact, the sheer outrage that this killer might one day be legally free led to a massive shift in Japanese law.
Yes, it did.
In 2010, largely catalyzed by this specific case, Japan completely abolished its statute of limitations for murder. Because of the Miyazawas, a killer in Japan can now be hunted forever.
It fundamentally altered the legal landscape. The public simply could not accept that a crime this intimate where the killer practically lived among the bodies could just time out after 15 or 25 years.
And the mystery continues to produce these eerie, lingering details that keep it in the public consciousness. Like, exactly 100 days after the murders, a Jizo statue was mysteriously left by the river near the house.
And for context, a Jizo statue is a traditional Japanese stone figure, often meant to protect the souls of children who have died.
Right.
Leaving one at a murder site exactly 100 days later, which is a significant period in Japanese mourning customs, is heavily loaded. It can be seen as an act of deep contrition by someone harboring guilt, or maybe a morbid taunt. For decades, nobody knew where it came from.
But they found out recently, didn't they?
Yeah, it was only recently, in 2025, that investigators actually managed to trace the specific lettering on the statue to a stonemason's website, proving the trail of breadcrumbs spans a quarter of a century.
It's unbelievable. Sadly, that long shadow has also turned the physical house into an object of morbid fascination. In November 2023, a group of 10 high school students actually broke onto the Miyazawa property in the middle of the night for a test of courage.
That's just awful.
It is. It shows how the house has transitioned from a tragic reality into a dark urban legend for a generation that wasn't even born when the murders happened.
It really highlights the danger of an unsolved crime. As decades pass, it stops being a tragedy about a real, loving family and morphs into a ghost story. But we have to anchor ourselves to the forensic reality. This wasn't a ghost. It was a physical person who bled, who ate, and who left their DNA behind.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought to consider. You know, we spend so much time analyzing the killer's bizarre post-murder behavior, bandaging his wounds, eating the ice cream, surfing the web. We instinctively frame those as the actions of a cold, calculating psychopath who felt untouchable.
Right, the mastermind.
But I want you to consider a chilling alternative. What if it wasn't calculated at all? What if this was the panicked, erratic stalling of a highly injured, exhausted teenager who committed an unspeakable act of violence, felt the adrenaline completely drained from his body, and sat down on that couch eating ice cream because he suddenly realized he hadn't thought at all about how he was going to escape?
It's a haunting reframing. We have all the forensic data of his actions, but the true mindset of the killer in those quiet, blood-soaked hours before dawn remains the deepest mystery of all.
Thanks for listening to The Evidence Room. If you enjoyed this episode, like and subscribe for more true crime investigations from around the world. Remember, some cases remain unsolved, but the evidence always tells a story.